John Ulzheimer is known as one of our nation's most recognized credit experts. Having worked for 28 years in the credit industry, John has become one of the most prolific speakers about credit and the go-to authority on answers to credit-related questions. Credit Countdown with John Ulzheimer.
Hello, my name is John Ulzheimer. I am a consumer credit expert. I've been in the credit industry since 1991. This is my 30th year. Spent time at both FICO, which is the company obviously that invented the FICO credit scoring system, and Equifax, which is one of the 3 generally recognized credit reporting agencies. Today's topic is one of my favorites. I've been getting questions for the better part of the last, 10, 15, 20 years from time to time from people asking me, hey, why are there only 3 big credit bureaus? Why aren't there like 10 or 20? In the era of disruption where, companies like Uber and Lyft have really changed how people get from point A to point B, how we're not always relying on taxi cabs any longer. It's actually kind of a good question is why hasn't some tech genius with deep pockets figured out how to create a 4th credit bureau or a 5th credit bureau? Or why don't we have a bunch of credit bureaus other than the big 3, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian? I'm going to answer that question. All right, why only 3, Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion? Well, whenever you make an investment in a company, obviously when you build a company, you expect some sort of a return on the investment. It's called ROI. You want return on your investment. So when companies like Lyft and Uber were created, obviously they had investors that were pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into the design and development of the company and were willing to be patient and wait until the company kind of caught hold. It became really common to, Uber from here to there, Lyft from here to there, and almost kind of institutionalize the name. That hasn't happened with credit reporting agencies, and I'm gonna tell you why. Because whoever is investing in another credit bureau, it would have to wait a really, really long time before they started to see any sort of return on their investment for a couple of reasons. Number one, for any company to buy a credit report from any of these companies, the credit report has to be sufficient enough to support a lending decision. So in other words, when you look at your own Equifax credit report, it's dozens of pages long in many instances, especially if you're older like me, and you've been using credit for many decades. If I just kind of created a database and said, hey, this is the 4th credit bureau, John's credit bureau, there's nothing in it. There's nothing on any of those credit reports. So what do I have to do? Is I have to convince banks, credit unions, credit card issuers, debt collectors, and any other company that furnishes information to the big 3 to now furnish it to John's credit bureau, the number 4 credit bureau. And guess what? There are over 11,000 of those companies that report information to the big 3 every single month. So I'm going to have to make contact with every single one of them and convince them, hey, you need a 4th credit bureau. Would you please provide or furnish your information, the same information you provide to the big 3, to me, number 4 credit bureau? So in other words, they have to have some sort of an incentive to do that. And right now, they don't. No one's been able to explain to me what's the incentive to send your information to a 4th credit bureau when you're already sending it to 3 credit bureaus. That's number 1. Number 2, FICO. Having a credit report without a FICO score or a VantageScore credit score is worthless. It's got to have a credit score built on the platform of the credit reporting agency for it to be used in mortgage lending, for it to be used in credit card issuing, for it to be used in auto lending, for it to be used in personal loans, student loans. You've got to have a credit score platform associated with your credit reporting agency. If I just created the 4th credit bureau, John's credit bureau, I would have to go to FICO and convince them, hey, I would really like it if y'all built me a FICO score on my data, which by the way, I have none, right? So you kind of start seeing the chicken and the egg problem here with respect to more than 3 credit bureaus. Then I would have to go to Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion, which collectively own the VantageScore credit score, and tell them, hey, I'm gonna be your competitor. I'm gonna be a 4th credit bureau, but I would like for you to build a VantageScore on my platform as well. Well, you tell me, how do you think that conversation would go? So right there, not only do I have no data, I would have to convince 11,000 companies to start sending me data, enough data so that my credit report could actually support a valid credit score, then I would have to convince not only FICO, but my 3 competitors to allow to build a credit score platform off my data, or it couldn't be used by any single lender, right? So you kind of see the problem with a 4th credit bureau. It's not as easy as just, getting a bunch of people to drive people around and reserve rides from A to B on your app. It's not that simple. And then finally, the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Every single of these 11,000 companies that furnish information to the big 3, when they send something to the credit reporting agencies, they have to comply with the provisions of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which includes investigation requirements, as well as many other requirements having to do with fraud, etc. My point is that it's expensive to furnish information to the credit bureaus because of liability issues. If you looked last year in 2020, calendar year 2020, more Fair Credit Reporting Act lawsuits were filed last year, by the way, in the middle of a global pandemic, than ever before. There was a record number. If you look at the number of FCRA lawsuits over the past 5 years, it's been going like this if you were to chart it. And last year was no exception, even during a global pandemic. So now you're gonna have to convince these people, you already have liability when you report to these 3 companies. I'm gonna ask for you to have even more liability and furnish your information to John's credit bureau. It could take 5, 10, maybe more years to get a critical mass of these furnishing companies to send information to a 4th credit bureau before the credit reports that are generated from that database are sufficient enough or representative enough of credit risk for a lender to start buying my credit reports, because ultimately that's the goal. What was that movie, If You Build It, They Will Come, Field of Dreams? Well, that's not necessarily true with respect to credit reporting agencies. I could build a credit bureau, I could have a database, it could be the most unbelievable cutting edge database on the globe. I can have 11,000 companies sending information to me every single month. I could convince FICO to build a credit score for me. I could convince my competitors to let me to build a Vantage score for me. And if none of these companies buy my credit reports, then what's the point of doing it? The point of doing this is to earn revenue, right? These are all, Equifax is publicly traded, TransUnion is publicly traded, Experian is publicly traded in the UK. All of these companies have to show profit and revenue. So it's just because I build a credit report database, that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm generating revenue, because now I have to go convince American Express, Wells Fargo, Chase, Citibank, and gobs of other companies to actually buy my credit reports. And so when they're buying my credit reports, what are they not doing? They're not buying their credit reports. So again, this is not necessarily something that's as simple as, it doesn't lend itself to disruption like other industries lend themselves to disruption. The easiest way, you're gonna love this, the easiest way to create a credit reporting agency is to buy a credit reporting agency. These companies are all publicly traded, they're not for sale. You can certainly buy shares of these companies, just like you could buy a share of any publicly traded company, but you can't just go to Equifax and say, hey, I wanna buy you. You certainly could, but I don't know that that's realistic, because you're not disrupting anything. It's not a 4th credit bureau, it's just a new ownership of an existing credit bureau. So this is why you do not see the 4th, the 5th, the 6th, etc. credit reporting agencies floating around out there, kind of being created in this era of disruption, because it is so difficult to build it. It takes so long to build it. And just because you build it doesn't mean that you're selling anything from it. If you have any questions, please drop them in the comment section below. Thank you very much for your time today. We'll speak again soon.
For more videos and credit tips from John Ulzheimer, go to www.tradelinesupply.com.